Hi there, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's August 14th. Today we celebrate a historic elm tree in Boston, and we remember the romantic English poet who went by the initials L.E.L. We'll also learn about the magazine that helped launch the National Audubon Society, and we'll salute the Scottish nurseryman who elevated to the top echelons of British horticulture. We'll also remember the Iowa botanist who dedicated her life to protecting the vanishing prairie ecosystem. And we'll celebrate the fleeting summer with some poetry. We'll grow that garden library with a book that features Audubon's masterful illustrations. And then we'll wrap things up with the story of a canning lid shortage back in 1975. But first, let's catch up on some greetings from gardeners from around the world in today's curated news. Well, I have to say that my greetings from gardeners this past week were actually kind of sad because they showed so many downed trees and destroyed gardens thanks to the storms that rolled across the country earlier this week. Jane in Des Moines wrote in and shared a picture of her beautiful oak tree, which is now laying across her backyard. So sad. And the same thing happened to Bob in Illinois. That tree was planted by his great-grandfather on the family homestead. And those losses are absolutely heartbreaking, and they serve as such a good reminder to us of just how much we really do value trees on our property and in our gardens. Now, if you'd like to participate in the Gardener Greetings segment, all you need to do is send your garden pictures, stories, birthday wishes, and so forth to my email at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. That's jennifer@thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that while you're at home, you can ask Alexa or Google to play the latest episode of the Daily Gardener podcast. And she will. It's just that easy. Here's today's curated news. Well, the blog Homes to Love recently shared a post called 5 Things to Consider Before You Landscape a Garden. And I actually thought their list was quite helpful. Here's an excerpt. We spoke to landscaping expert John McMillan for his thoughts and handy tips on creating the perfect landscaped garden. How can you choose the right plants, set a theme, include a deck or a water feature, or know how to describe what you want into a brief? Well, John has 5 crucial questions to consider to build a garden that's fit for your home. First, he says, research, research, research. You can always go online and look at tons of different photos with all kinds of ideas that can help you crystallize the dreams that you have for your garden. And John cautions, only go to your local nursery when you have a good idea of what you want. The next thing John wants you to do is to consider your lifestyle. Do you want to spend more time outside? Do you want to build a sanctuary? Do you want to build an outdoor living space? And don't forget to consider the long term. How's the garden going to look in 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years' time? Next, John says to choose carefully. Make sure that you're buying the right plants. Check your labels. Check your growing zones. Think about how the plants will look at maturity, and so on. John has many helpful questions in this section of the post. For number 4, John reminds us to keep an eye on your budget. This is where doing your homework pays off. Look into the cost for materials and think about your timeline as well. And I love what John says here as he ends this little section. Keep in mind that construction in reality is not like TV shows. It generally takes a longer bit of time. And then finally, John suggests to keep it real. Where do you need to get some professionals to help you? What are some things that you can do on your own? And what really is a worthwhile investment in your garden? Now, as I mentioned, this post has loads of questions from John. Now, if you'd like to read it in detail for yourself, all you need to do is type in the number 5 in the Facebook group for the show, and this post will pop up. All right, over at the blog, I wrote an original post for today called Saint Werenfrids Day, which is celebrated every year on August 14th. Now, gardeners know that Werenfrid is the patron saint of vegetable gardens, and Werenfrid is often portrayed as a priest holding up a ship with a coffin in it. And sometimes Werenfrid is displayed as a priest laid to rest in his ship. Now, what do these emblems, the coffin and the ship, have to do with vegetable gardens? Well, it turns out absolutely nothing. But the coffin and the ship do remind us just how beloved Saint Werenfrid was by the Dutch people. You see, as a Benedictine monk, Werenfrid tended the gardens at his monastery, and his gardens served a vital purpose, feeding the poor and the hungry. As a gardener and a clergyman, Werenfrid was a nourisher of both bodies and souls. After decades of caring for his flock in and around Arnhem in the Netherlands, Werenfrid died at the age of 90. And after he died, 2 nearby towns named Westervoort and Elst started fighting over his body. Each town wanted the honor of being his final resting place, and of course, being blessed by Werenfrid's sacred remains. Now, although the citizens of Elst contended that Werenfrid himself had said he wanted to be laid to rest in their town, the dispute continued until the 2 towns agreed to let nature dictate Werenfrid's fate. According to lore, Werenfrid's body was placed on an unmanned boat on the Rhine, and fate brought Werenfrid to the shores of Elst, where today the Werenfrid Church still stands. And so it is that on this day we remember the gentle, loving gardener monk named Werenfrid, who is often shown holding a ship, carrying a coffin. Werenfrid is also invoked for gout and stiff joints, which, if you grow vegetables, you'll appreciate how those conditions sometimes go along with gardening. All right, that's it for today's gardening news. Now, if you'd like to check out any of my curated news articles or original blog posts for yourself, you're in luck, because I share all of it with the listener community in the free Facebook group for the show, the Daily Gardener Community. So there's never a need to take notes or search for links. It's all there for you for free. The next time you're on Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community and request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. Here's today's brevities. It was on this day in 1765 that a large crowd gathered under a huge elm tree in Boston. The group was there to protest the Stamp Act. It had recently been passed by the British Parliament. The Stamp Act imposed a tax on paper in the American colonies, and it meant that all the paper had to have a stamp on it. So if you were publishing a newspaper or needed a mortgage deed or court papers, it all had to be printed on paper with a tax stamp on it. Now, the old elm tree that these people were gathered under had become a rallying point for resistance against the British, and that tree became known as the Liberty Tree. The Liberty Tree had been planted in 1646, just 16 years after Boston became a city. As the colonists began rejecting orders from Britain, the Liberty Tree became a bulletin board of sorts. And as its symbolism grew, protesters would share calls to action on the trunk of the Liberty Tree. Now, when the Stamp Act was repealed, the Liberty Tree was the place that people went to celebrate. They hung flags and streamers, as well as lanterns, from its branches. And after the war began, Thomas Paine wrote an ode to the Liberty Tree in the Pennsylvania Gazette. It said, "Unmindful of names or distinctions they came, for freemen and brothers agree. With one spirit endued, they one friendship pursued, and their temple was Liberty Tree." 4 months later, in August of that year, British troops and loyalists descended on the Liberty Tree, and a man named Nathaniel Coffin, Jr. cut it down. And today is the birthday of the English poet and novelist Leticia Elizabeth Landon, who was born on this day in 1802. When Leticia first started out writing poetry, she signed her work with her initials, L.E.L. Leticia once wrote, "I will look on the stars and look on thee and read the page of thy destiny." Well, Leticia's destiny was set in motion as she explored the woods and overgrown gardens near her home. Spending time in nature actually inspired Leticia to write poetry. And by the time she was 18 years old, her governess shared her poems with a neighbor, William Jordan, who was the editor of the Literary Gazette. Married and twice her age, Jordan nonetheless began a relationship with Leticia. And Lucasta Miller's book, L.E.L., The Lost Life and Scandalous Death of Leticia Elizabeth Landon, tells her tragic story, how Jordan fathered children with Leticia and then forced her to give them all up as infants, how he stole the income from her published works and then dumped her for another younger woman. Leticia's story ended at the age of 36 in Africa. She committed suicide shortly after she married the governor of Ghana. One of Leticia's first poems was an ode to the Michaelmas daisy, the Aster amylis, in the genus Aster. It's also known commonly as autumn asters. You probably have some growing in your garden right now. Autumn asters have narrow green leaves, and they're covered by clouds of daisy-like purple-petaled flowers that have yellow centers. The name of this aster is from the Latin word for star, which is in reference to the shape of its showy flower heads that are just coming into bloom right now in the middle of August. Here's The Michaelmas Daisy by Leticia Elizabeth Landon. Last smile of the departing year, thy sister sweets are flown. Thy pensive wreath is far more dear from blooming thus alone. Thy tender blush, thy simple frame, unnoticed might have passed, but now thou contest with softer claim the loveliest and the last. Sweet are the charms in thee we find, emblem of hope's gay wing. 'Tis thine to call past bloom to mind, to promise future spring. Leticia's poetry was romantic, and she's often referred to as the female Byron. Here's a little verse Leticia wrote about April. Of all the months that fill the year, give April's month to me. For earth and sky are then so filled with sweet variety. And it was on this day in 1873 that the magazine Forest and Stream debuted. Forest and Stream featured outdoor activities like hunting and fishing. It was dedicated to wildlife conservation, and it actually helped launch the National Audubon Society. And in 1930, the magazine merged with Field and Stream. And today is the anniversary of the death of the Scottish nurseryman and seedsman James Dixon, who died on this day in 1822. James Dixon led a remarkable life. He was born to a poor family in Scotland, and as a young boy, he began working as a gardener on the nearby estate of an earl. The job was a perfect fit for James. And one day, James overheard one of his fellow gardeners inquire about the name of a plant. And when another young gardener successfully answered, James was instantly inspired to learn everything he could about plants. After working his way up as a gardener in Scotland, James eventually moved to London, where he set up a nursery business in Covent Garden. James became a trusted authority on mosses, fungi, and grasses, and he even wrote 2 large botanical volumes. With his hard-won botanical knowledge and eager disposition, he became friends with both the explorer Joseph Banks and the king's gardener William Forsyth. And those key relationships put him in the top horticultural circles of his day. As a nurseryman, James was hardworking and insightful. When the British Museum decided it was time to find a new gardener, Joseph Banks asked James if he was interested in the job. So James put together a modest bid to improve and maintain the landscape around the museum. Not only did James win the bid, but it was a position that he held for the rest of his life. In terms of posterity, James was a founding member of the Royal Horticultural Society, as well as one of the 7 men who established the Linnean Society. Now, over the course of his life, James returned to Scotland many times to go on botanizing expeditions. One of his botanist peers, Sir James Edward Smith, recognized James' strengths, saying he had a powerful mind, spotless integrity, singular acuteness, and accuracy. And he memorably called James lynx-eyed because he was so good at spotting plants in the field. James married Margaret Park after his first wife died, and this marriage also resulted in a lifelong friendship with his brother-in-law, Dr. Mungo Park. And it was James who introduced Mungo to his friend Joseph Banks, and that's how Mungo became a world-famous explorer. Mungo traveled the world, and in the late 1700s, he went first to Sumatra and then to Gambia. James and his family thought Mungo had died after not hearing from him for 2 years. But on Christmas morning in 1797, James was working at his beloved British Museum garden. He'd gotten up early to tend the greenhouses, making sure that all the fires were still going. He was tending to his work, and he looked up and saw Mungo. It made for a happy family Christmas. Almost 10 years later, Mungo would undertake another journey, this time to Niger. But sadly, after this trip, James would never see his dear friend and brother-in-law again. Mungo was attacked and killed by natives in 1806. 14 years later, on this day, James died at his home at the age of 84. The poor Scottish child gardener had made a successful life for himself tending the best gardens in England and was counted among the founding pillars of English horticulture. James requested to be buried in the churchyard where he had spent so much time as a younger man collecting mosses. And today, James is remembered with the Dixonia. That's the tree fern genus. And today is the birthday of the botanist Ada Hayden, who was born on this day in 1880. Ada was the curator of the Iowa State University Herbarium. As a young girl growing up in Ames, Iowa, she fell in love with the flora surrounding her family home. Ada was a talented photographer, artist, and writer, and she put all of those skills to good use, documenting Iowa's prairies. And Ada became the first woman to earn a PhD from Iowa State. Later in life, Ada inherited her grandparents' farm, and she often brought her botany students there to walk through the prairie and to take notes on their observations. And Ada's life work was to save the vanishing prairie ecosystem. Ada loved the prairie. She wrote, "Throughout the season, from April to October, the colorful flowers of the grassland flora present a rainbow-hued sequence of bloom. It is identified with the open sky, and it is the unprotected battleground of wind and weather." When Ada died, the university named a 240-acre tract of virgin prairie Hayden Prairie in her honor. In Unearthed Words, we're closing in on Labor Day. Here are some words about the fleeting summer. This first one's from the English writer and poet Samuel Johnson. "Catch then, oh catch the transient hour. Improve each moment as it flies. Life's a short summer, man a flower. He dies. Alas, how soon he dies." And here's one from the poet Winifred Sackville Stoner Jr. It's called Midsummer Joys. "Give me the joys of summer queen so fair, with a wealth of lovely flowers and fruits and sun-kissed air. Talk not to me of winter, with ice and frost and snow, nor changing spring and autumn, when howling winds will blow. No, I will take the joys of summer every time. So to this queen of seasons, I dedicate my rhyme." And finally, here's a line from the English playwright, poet, and actor William Shakespeare. "Summer's lease hath all too short a date." It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Audubon's Masterpieces by John James Audubon. This book came out in 2004, and the subtitle is 150 Prints from the Birds of America. Amazon reviews of this book are very positive. One reader wrote, "Beautiful book. I admired framed Audubon prints in decorating magazines and at Pottery Barn's website for a long time, but couldn't afford their prices. So I finally decided to buy this book, use an X-Acto knife, and cut out the prints to frame myself. Yes, feel free to cringe at the thought of tearing apart such a beautiful book. I did too. I framed 12 prints in inexpensive 8x10 dollar frames from a store of a similar name." Another reader wrote, "I actually purchased a second copy of this book. I was so impressed with my first that I purchased a second to frame individual prints. They're a perfect 8 by 10, and they look amazing in the grouping of 12 on my wall, and everyone thinks I paid a fortune for them. And then finally, another one wrote, Audubon's Masterpieces is simply put gorgeous. I bought this book for the sole purpose of having a pretty book of birds to lay out on my coffee table. Buy this for your sister, your mother, your nerdy book-loving brother, father, boyfriend. It brings a smile to my face every time I glance at the pretty hardback cover and randomly open up to a page of beauty. Nature is beautiful, people. Well, John James Audubon was a French-American ornithologist, naturalist, and painter. During his life, he identified 25 new species of birds, and his detailed illustrations depicted the birds in their natural habitats. His major work, a color-plated book entitled The Birds of America, is considered one of the finest ornithological books ever completed. This book is 352 pages of Audubon's masterwork of bird illustrations. You can get a copy of Audubon's Masterpieces by John James Audubon and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $18. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today in 1975, the Hearn Democrat out of Hearn, Texas, announced there was a canning lid shortage. Here's what it said. The problem has reached crisis proportions in parts of the country where home gardeners have planted crops in hopes of saving on grocery bills. As the harvest begins, these home gardeners are discovering the canning lid shortage means there's no way of preserving their ripe fruits and vegetables for fall and winter use. Part of the cause is the tremendous increase in the number of home gardeners. Sound familiar? The Federal Office of Consumer Affairs estimates that 12 million new gardeners have joined the market for home canning equipment in the past 2 years. Another part of the problem is that in addition to the greatly increased number of gardeners who need lids, some home canners have been buying far more lids than they will ever need. Because of this hoarding for future use, the shortage has been aggravated. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Wyoming, Minnesota with the help of Paige Mance, Brooke Bierbaum, Kiana Rayleigh, Maddie Doyle, Natalie Decker, and Eric Begay. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media. You can follow the show on Instagram, and listeners always have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. All the stories and books that are featured on the show can be found over at thedailygardener.org, thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. Last but not least, you can share your own gardener greetings on the show by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.